It's not a joke. We assume one that's built into our MTF and is currently in there. The pension fund may require that as a result of the growing. And that's mainly because the investment returns have dropped out of anything really. You know, we were saying that in our discussion, we were saying that it's practically zero at the minute on a lot of these things. But alongside that, we've also had life expectancy increasing, which is the main reason for our liability test will be next year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Paul.
Yeah, that's right.
Will be next year, and as part of that, we will then be able to update our assumptions in our OTFP, and we will understand what the pension fund is requiring of the council. It may be we increase above our 1%. It may be that they believe that that level is adequate, and they'll explain the reason why for that. So at the minute, we are waiting for that triennial review to take place. Yeah, you've got to remember, in the last triennial review, they wouldn't have predicted anything for COVID. So, you know, clearly that has an effect on any assumptions they made in their last triennial review.
Yeah, and I think it's worth adding that every year the actuaries look at all of their different assumptions, and in our report we go through the main ones that they make and whether we think they're consistent with our experts. But they change year on year, and obviously returns change year on year, so you can see big swings in pension liability year on year. I think a couple of years ago it reduced significantly, and then obviously COVID is hit. What you've got to remember is you look, pension funds are funding based on a time frame of around 20 to 25 years. So there are going to be short-term fluctuations, but they should even out, and the rate of return should be fairly good over that time. I don't think there's any concern at the moment. Our report shows, but I think it's just something to be mindful of. And obviously, if the pension fund think that your contributions need to go up, they
recovery. Probably because public bodies are still got to do recovery. That there will be a serious question for trustees to look at in terms of increased costs. And that's why I'm raising it now. I have actually been a trustee of a number of large trust pension funds over a number of years, therefore recognise these figures as a concern. So I think it's something we as a risk an audit committee should be aware of moving forward.
I mean, I'll keep the committee updated on progress against when the triennial review is going to take place and when the pension fund meeting will take place.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And just the other medium-term financial situation over which we have no real control, but need to sort of consider other issues on that. Thank you. Any other specific questions? Councillor Baines.
It's not so much a question, Madam Chair, as a comment. This is page 125. And issue, and I don't want to this related to software connectivity. 20 years ago, I sat through an IT slip up where I think the term used was computers can't always talk to each other. It sounds very odd for me to be raising this technical point, but it does concern me that we have spent over the years. I'm not expecting the officers to answer on this. It's not a question. It is a comment that over the years we have spent tens of thousands on IT systems, and yet time and again it seems, unfortunately, and I do wonder if this committee is the place to look for next year, probably, the suite of systems and how effective they are. I speak as somebody who my fellow councillors know is computer illiterate, or very nearly so. I make efforts to get there, but I don't pretend to understand it, and I don't like to keep reading these reports 20 years later that are basically raising the same general question. As I say, I don't in the least wish, Madam Chair, to reopen the silly issue, but it does concern me that, in a way, human error can take place in the technology. And I wonder if we could perhaps look at that for the future.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, very valid point. I think that's something to, when we're looking at the next internal audit planning, obviously different areas are looked at by the internal auditor. And I think in a lot of these cases, it is the procedure and the human input into the procedure rather than the actual technology. The technology, in most cases, does what it's told to do. But it's the procedures around it. Then I think this committee has raised this issue, and it's come out in some of the internal audit reports about the procedure documentation and the handovers between staff and that type of thing, which usually are deemed on their own quite a low risk, but I think the cumulative effect, I think that's something this committee has been concerned about in terms of procedural manuals and staff handovers. Yeah. So I think that is certainly something to keep our eye on, and maybe specifically raise that as in that aspect.
Thank you. I mean, it might be a day or 2 days of internal audit time. Yeah. Time well spent.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could just come back on that point, Chair.
Brown, yeah.
Yeah. The internal auditors actually did quite a detailed piece of work on the SIL situation, and that internal audit report's available to look at. Yeah. I think in particular the issue that arose from that was, and it's an item which I keep coming back to, as the chair will know. So I think that is a bigger issue than connectivity between the two systems, and lack of process, as the chair said as well, was the other side. And I think that has now been addressed, but I know that in fact they've been back and looked in there's an audit report this time round on the development management. Yeah. And I think they've identified that they are now working.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or questions on step count and Councillor Parker?
I've been wondering how to frame this into a question for a day or two, but I'll probably have to defer to Gordon's greater knowledge of pension funds than mine, because they've done a pension funds at all. But I know Gordon's some years of experience of working with them. I noticed 452 pensions. I was just looking at the liabilities we've got for the pensions as well. High consumer price index has been assumed in the medium term. What might the effect be of another percentage point rise in inflation?
Sorry,
could you repeat that? Please?
What might the effect be of another percentage point rise in inflation on our liabilities?
If the inflation rises, then we would have to, obviously that would be reflected on liability would go up, because the cost of that is going up. Now, to offset that, you may have your return on investments going up, which may offset that. So it's difficult. We'd have to look at the underlying assumptions, and not all the investments are invested, that will change overnight. Some of them are longer term investments that might not have an impact. So over the longer term, the investment should catch up, but it might in the short term, as Paul was saying, the pension fund is over a longer period. So over that time frame, you'd hope that your assumptions would even out, and if not, the actuaries would adjust it, and we would get an increase in liabilities or an increase in assets, depending on how it impacted those investments or liabilities.
So presumably, Paul, that's just part of the swing one way or another. Where we see that.
Yeah, so every year the actuary will look at those and think whether it's right, and we'll put it through their model of how they arrive at it, and that will come up with saying this is your liability. Obviously, the assets are managed independently of the liability. The assets are the contributions, and they go out to the money managers and the managers who invest it and try and make the best return they can possibly get from the pension fund. That's obviously netted off against the liability, which is where the actuary comes in and says, well, you've got these are the pensioners, this is what the future pensioners, this is what we think is going to be the liability, and that
On the accountant's medium-term financial plan in terms of what our assumptions are. And we do assume that it will increase by 1% each year. Anything over and above that is clearly the pressure on our LTFP.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary? Thank you. If there's no other questions, I would like to actually thank all for getting these the statement of accounts together and audit it for what has actually been the second challenging year of getting these done in the timescale. So that is much appreciated, and to have looking to an unmodified opinion. So after that, I would like to move to the recommendation, which is, because of timing, which is to Rachel, we're on item 8. The recommendation on the statement of accounts is to delegate the signing of the statement of accounts for 2020-21 to myself and the Strategic Director for Resources. And also, the committee is also asked to decide that no referral of the committee's decision be allowed due to the need to, we have to approve these accounts by the 30th of September. Can I have somebody to propose that? Councillor McCartney and the seconder. Okay. So all those in favour, can you raise your hand?
Unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for presenting that. Okay, next item, number 9, is the external auditor's report. Andrew, do you want to say anything before pass over to Paul from Grant Thornton?
No, I think Paul will talk the committee through the report, so I'll just hand over to Paul.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Welcome this evening. And unfortunately, John Gregory isn't able to make it. I assume he won't be making it. So
no, he was planning on. John's the key audit partner, so he's the engagement lead, so he's the actual person who puts his signature to the audit report. He was planning to attend, unfortunately he came down ill this afternoon, so he's asked me to come talk you through the report. It's a good report. As it's already been alluded to, at the moment we're just doing our final pieces of work, mainly around the actuarial report and the pension liability, because I think it was late last week. We supplied with a revised actuarial report which changed the net liability. And this was due to the pension fund identifying that some of its asset valuations that it had done at the year end were estimates. And once they received the actuals, they realised that there was a material difference for the pension fund between the estimate and the actual, which obviously has a knock-on effect to any admitted bodies, which obviously their materiality is significantly bigger because you're dealing with assets in the billions. But obviously that has a knock-on effect to you that it could be potentially material, so the pension fund asked the actually to kind of revisit their reports. And as Andy already said, that's led to a £1.88 million movement in your liability.
Sorry, Paul, could I ask you maybe to speak up a bit louder, and maybe a little bit slower? So that we can, this is quite an echoey space, so thank you.
So yeah, so we're proposing an unmodified audit opinion, which in old terms is an unqualified opinion. And then going through on that's the headlines on page 1. On page 2, there's the VFM. This year, the National Audit Office has introduced a new VFM, value for money arrangements. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the best year to introduce this because it's a lot more detailed work. And in the past, what we've had to do is just say whether our conclusion is qualified or unqualified. This year, under the 3 headlines, we need to give you a commentary and a narrative around those areas. Obviously, that's a significant piece of work, and the timing of it hasn't been ideal. And in most cases, like most audit firms, we've taken the view that the audit report on the accounts is more important than the BFM conclusion. The National Audit Office has agreed and has extended the deadline for giving this opinion from 3 months. For 3 months from the date that we sign the audit report. So obviously we're intending to sign it on 30th September, which gives us effectively until the end of December to do this piece of work. So work has started. I've been in discussions with Andrew and Sab around what the key documents are, what their views are on some of the questions that we have to ask. But at the moment, there's nothing coming out of that we need to bring to your attention. Obviously, we'll be issuing our auditor's annual report, which includes value for money conclusion at a later date before the end of December. Staying on page 1 through 4, statutory duties. We've not exercised any of our additional statutory duties, and once we've finished our BFM work, we'll be issuing the audit certificates. The audit certificate is different to the audit report, which is where it gets confusing. The audit report is on the financial statements. The audit certificate says that this year we are closing the audit so that there's no objection. So obviously in the past, so just going through on page 1 through 7, significant risks. There's a number of significant risks that we've identified. These were reported in the audit plan. There's no changes to these. The first one on page 1 through 7 is the management override of controls. This is a requirement of the international audit standards that this was included. We're not saying that we think management are overriding the controls, but we have to look to make sure that it's not happening. We do this through looking at journals and testing those to make sure that there's nothing going on around the journals. As you can see from this, we haven't identified any issues in regard to that. On page 138, the next two, fraudulent revenue recognition. Again, this is a presumed risk under the auditing standards. However, this one we can rebut if we can identify that there's no material risks. So there's revenue and expenditure in both cases. We were able to rebut those, and our testing has not identified any issues that would make us change that assessment. On page 139, the next one is the valuation of land and buildings. Property, plant and equipment or land and buildings is one of the biggest figures on your accounts, and is subject to valuation techniques by a certified risk valuer. Obviously, estimation process techniques can be subjective and there can be variance in it. So that's why we've identified a significant risk. Obviously, we've gone through that and we haven't identified any issues in relation to valuation of land and buildings. On page 140, valuation of pension fund net liability. So we've already talked about this, and as you pointed out, it's one of the biggest figures in your accounts. We're still, as I've said, we're still finishing off our work on it, but at the moment there's nothing apart from the adjustment that you've identified for your revised actuarial report we wish to bring to your attention. On page 141, under the new international audit standards, we need to give you more information on key estimates within your accounts. Unsurprisingly, they kind of tie in with two of our significant risks, which is around the valuation of land and buildings. We've looked at the estimation technique that your valuers used, and there's no issues within that that we wish to bring to your attention. We've agreed their information source data. We've looked at the techniques they've used, how they've arrived at those figures, and like I said, there's nothing to raise there. On page 142, again, net pension liability. We've only picked out a few of the key assumptions in this estimate, but again, because of the nature of this and the highly technical aspect of this, we engage our own expert, which is PwC, who review the estimation techniques used by your actuary. And as you see, there's the actuary's value, and then there's PwC come up with a range of each assumptions. We've not identified any issues in relation to those. We're happy with those. We can move on. So the next bit I would like to bring attention is on page 145, which is around going concern. Under the auditing standards, we need to assess whether the council is going concern. It's slightly different in the public sector because obviously continuity of service is your going concern. Because if Rutland as a council was disbanded or removed, your services still need to continue by another body. Therefore, it is a going concern. In the past, we've had issues with this around how we come to this conclusion because of the nature of the auditing standard. It's not designed specifically for the public sector. However, this year, luckily, there's a practice note 10 has come out which deals specifically with the public sector. So as long as you've kind of got a medium-term financial strategy and plan, you're not subject to reorganisation. The bar is set a lot lower than it has been in the past, when it's been a council has had to be prepared to, it's had to go through the same process as a private company, which obviously the private company is a lot more detailed about going concern because it has more implications. So again, there's nothing that we want to point out. We agree with your conclusion that you're a going concern. Section 3 on page 148 is valid for rearrangements. Page 148 kind of takes you through a quick canter of what the changes are. As I've said, our work is still underway, so there's nothing we want to bring to your attention at the moment. Section 4 is our independence and ethics. Obviously, we need to prove that we're independent of you as a council. Page 151 sets out the additional services that we provide to the council. These are mainly grant certifications of grant returns. This is teachers' pension return and housing benefit claim. This is work we've done in the past and normally goes hand in hand with undertaking the audit of the council. On page 153, these are audit adjustments. So the first one is collection from debts. This was included in Andrew's report in paragraph 2.1.2. What we identified was that collection from debtors and prepayments, creditors and prepayments have been incorrectly netted off. They should be shown separately in debtors and creditors. It has no effect on the balance sheet. It's just, instead of being in one line on the balance sheet, it has to be split into between assets and liabilities. So that's £504,000 adjustment for this year between debtors and creditors. Officers wanted to adjust the 1920 figures so that there was a comparable comparison between the two. We didn't require this because the difference is material. However, their view was that it was material to the council. So we agree with that, and that's why there's a prior period adjustment note included in the financial statements. Second adjustment is in relation to the pension fund obligations. At the time of writing this report, we hadn't seen the updated actuarial reports. We weren't sure what the figures were, but it's 1.88 million, and we've now worked through that and we've agreed that that's the correct adjustment, which is included in the revised financial statements that you just received. There's two more disclosure changes. One is the inclusion of the prior period adjustment note, and there were a few minor adjustments, but nothing significant to bring to your attention. Section B, Appendix B is our fees. Within our audit plan, we were proposing a fee of 77,420. At the moment, there are no plans to change this at the moment. In addition, during the year, we've also issued a fee for the 1920 objection work, which you received in your July committee meeting of £5,000. And again, the non-audit fees are for the two departments that we audit, which we haven't actually completed the work, so we can't confirm what the final fees are for those. Sections, Appendix C is our audit opinion. I'm not going to go through that. We really don't want to go through that. Apart from disposing of a modified opinion. And then Appendix D is management letter representation, which I think is a separate item on here, so I won't go through that either. And then Appendix E is a letter to the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee in relation to the delay in the VFM conclusion. This is a requirement of general guidance that if we're not issuing it at the same time as our audit opinion, we need to write to the chair and inform me why we're not doing that. But it's like notification. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Has anyone got any? Can I just ask, just out of interest, in obviously that adjustment, the netting off debtors creditors this year, was that picked up last year but not adjusted because it wasn't material, or was it not picked up?
No, it's the way we audit debtors and creditors, we do it on a sample basis, and this year we picked the collection fund debtors as part of our sample, and as part of that work we identified that the balance shown in the working papers within debtors had been against creditors.
The last year just didn't happen to pick that one. I remember last year there was again a netting off, which I think it was recharges, wasn't it, that was presented. It didn't make any difference to the accounts, but it just ended up being presented in a slightly different way. So that's just dependent on what you pick on your samples. Yeah,
obviously in an ideal world, as auditors, we would do 100% testing on everything.
Yeah.
Obviously your fee for that would be astronomical and would probably take the whole year to audit it. So what we do to get our assurances and take a lot of our testing is on a sample basis to get an assurance. Obviously, if we find issues within those samples, then we expand those samples to gain an understanding of the population. So yeah, and we just happen to pick collection conductors this year. And then obviously, once we found that, we talked it through with Andrew and the officers, we were able to identify what the specific issue was and that it didn't relate to any of the other debtors within that balance.
Has anyone got any other questions for no? Again, thank you for all your work on that. And so we're asked to receive the external auditor's report and to approve the letter of representation for signing by myself and the section 151 officer. Show of hands. Yeah. Could I ask if you would show your hands if you approve of that recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. Unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Okay, item number 10 is the future of internal audit, which is over to you, Andrew, to present and answer any questions.
The future of external audit and internal.
Sorry, I meant that was a slip of the tongue. I'm basing on the agenda.
It's a future of external audit.
Yeah.
So previously we've been brought to this committee around appointing auditors through the Public Sector Auditors Association, PSAA, and that's how we ended up appointing Ron Thornton. We went through that process before. that was a fixed term contract, and we need to opt into the contract again with PSAA. We're recommending that we do that again. It worked well last time. We've had a good relationship with Ron Thornton's. The quality of the audits have been good. The LGA, as a trade body for local government, recommending that all councils do sign up to the PSSA. From an officer's point of view, we can't think of any reason why we shouldn't, and any additional benefits we would get if we did appoint our own auditors. If we go on our own, you have to use a standard specification. You have to choose from a list of approved suppliers. And on this basis, like I said, there's no benefit that we can think of that we get to. Obviously, for Rutland as well, we don't have the buying power of a collective of a number of authorities, so we may join in that audit that we wouldn't get otherwise. We are going to plan to take a paper to full council, but obviously we want to bring the report to audit risk committee to get your view before doing that. So over to any questions if there are.
Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Brown?
No question, Chair, but I think it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. There's no incentive really. I think that has been demonstrated with PSA has done a reasonable job. They were a bit expensive, but it's a reasonable job of pulling together auditors for the public sector generally, both for large and small authorities.
Yeah. I would definitely second that, because obviously the other options of actually going through our own procurement and things is not a viable option in my opinion. So can I ask that we've been asked to endorse the recommendation to full council to opt into the national sector-led arrangements and nominate the public sector audit appointments limited PFOA to appoint the external auditor on its behalf. So I'm happy to propose that. Can somebody second? Councillor Ainsley that time.
Show it around.
Can I have all those in favour, please raise your hand.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Back to you again for item 11, the Regulation Investigatory Powers Act 2000. What's that? Do we have a verbal update on that?
I do have a verbal update. The strategic director has also updated me, and they've not been used. They've not used the power.
Okay. So you're reporting that there's been no use of the powers. Okay, thank you. I think we're happy to accept that report. Right, we're now on to the internal audit. Welcome, Rachel. And well, thank you for making it over from your other meeting at Melton, which is why you're on the end of the agenda. So, just over straight to Rachel. Andrew, did you want to add anything? Okay, well, straight to Rachel to present your internal audit update.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you again for amending the agenda for me as well, so that I could attend. So this is the latest update on the delivery of the internal audit plan for the current financial year. So there's a full copy as Appendix A in the format that members of the committee will be familiar with. So I don't intend to go through it in detail, but I'll just take you through some of the key points. There's obviously a copy of the internal audit plan as U24-26 of the papers, and as you'll see, there are audits that have been finalised since the last committee meeting in relation to health and safety and development management. There are no areas of significant concern that I'm going to need to flag to the committee in relation to those audits. Members of the committee will have received full copies of those audit reports once they were finalised, and as I say, there's no only minor organisational risk in relation to both of those, so we've not anything to flag for your attention at this point. I would just note, in terms of health and safety, obviously the assurance opinion is slightly lower there in terms of compliance. That reflects that a lot of the work does remain work in progress, and we were aware of this when we went into the audit, and we reviewed a lot of the action plans in relation to that and made recommendations around how that could be strengthened further. But ultimately, it remains a work in progress, and we will follow up all of those recommendations in due course over the rest of this financial year. Also within the report is an update on the implementation of audit recommendations. So Appendix B provides you with an overview. There hasn't been much change since the last committee papers, to be honest. There hasn't been much time lapsed. But we have got, as you can see there, 6 recommendations that are currently showing as overdue. There are only 3 that fall into the category of high or medium priority in over 3 months. So I have provided full details of those on pages 30 and 31 of the report. These will all be actions that are familiar to the committee, having been reported a number of times in the past. I am pleased to report the position on these at this point, actually. They're all in relation to the Highways Contract Management Audit, which obviously the committee have received these actions over a period of time. This dates back to 1920. A meeting booked with one of my audit team, with the directorate, to go through the 2 actions that are noted, so the first and the third ones that are listed in the table, with a view to closing those hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We just wanted to get assurance that rather than just ticking it off because the action has been completed, we want to actually look at it on tracker. So hopefully I will be able to report back to the committee on that at the next meeting. The third one in relation to training. I think this one has been a victim of some of the delays due to COVID in terms of the delivery of training sessions, but we do have a revised date at the end of the calendar year for that completion. So that's a quick run through. I do also know that the chair has had contact with the directorate of the places services to get some assurances around that as well, following discussions at the last committee meeting. The only other thing to add is there is an additional recommendation in relation to the report this evening, which is in relation to an additional change to the audit plan. What we are proposing, following the extensive discussions that we actually had that I thought were really useful at the last committee meeting around how service requests are tracked and how they are logged and followed to make sure that we actually, officers are responding and that all of those are recorded in some way. At the moment, we have an oversight of those. I'm reflecting on that. I've spoken to senior management and we've discussed it and thought actually there would be scope for a consultancy piece of work on this from the internal audit team. So what we're proposing this evening is an amendment to the plan to add some work, some consultancy work around the tracking and recording of service requests. And what we're proposing is to remove the audit work on the financial management code, which had 10 days allocated for Q3. And I'm comfortable as your Chief Internal Auditor to remove that from the plan, because I am assured that the Section 151 officer has conducted his own self-assessment against the code, which we can review as part of my assurances for the year anyway. So it's not that there's a gap in the assurance there, we just would have been adding a little bit extra to that. So it's something we can look at in future years, but we do have something to plug that assurance gap in the meantime. So I'm happy to take any questions, but those are the recommendations this evening.
Thank you, Rachel. Open it up, any questions? No. Just to follow up on the highways. Action, which Rachel has summarised, the committee has been an ongoing matter of concern. And as agreed following the last meeting, I formally wrote to the senior management team and I have circulated to everybody the replies, which basically summarised by Rachel in her report. The reply from Penny Sharp was that the recommendations, as Rachel said, 1 and 3 were complete, but they hadn't been closed down yet because they wanted to make sure that they've been bedded in from an operational perspective, and therefore we have the sort of the aim to be revisited by Rachel in October, and the training by the end of December. Was everybody happy with those responses? I think we're getting to the point now where actually, and I think a very thorough process has been taken. It is, you know, it has gone on for too long, but I think we would hope that these will be all closed down and off this list by the end of this calendar year, to indicate and that they are thoroughly embedded in the process. And obviously we'll hear back from you, Rachel, at the next meeting following your October review. Anything further on that one, Councillor Brown?
Not on that, Chair.
Okay.
Just looking at the 2 reports that have been issued in the interim since our last meeting, particularly the early years providers, the payment early years providers. There's a number of activities there required to be completed, particularly in terms of documentation procedures, something we were discussing just a few moments ago, and they were all due for completion either June, August or September. And I was wondering, particularly the medium, whether they'll be closed down in due course. So maybe reporting back to the next meeting, that'd be useful to know, because it just seemed a repeating feature within that particular function. Not having procedures, not having documentation, not having the evidence. It was interesting to know.
To report back at the next meeting.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank
that.
you. The other thing I, again, was going to pick up, just to add to that, obviously on the development management report and the health and safety, that one of the recommendations about guidance and procedures being up to date. I was a little bit concerned at the health and safety one, which was assessed as medium risk, that would be done by September 22. I mean, I know that these things take a while to do, but it seems, you know, the risks in health and safety can be, you know, quite major. So I don't know if you've got any comments on that assessment or that work being done.
Yes, Chair. So I think it was quite basic when it started, the witness piece of work, to be honest. I think we now have a dedicated health and safety officer, which has made a big difference in terms of the coverage and the control place. I think it was starting from scratch with a lot of this work. So I think the progress has been good to date. There are still areas that they need to work on, but we are assured that those are all forming part of this action plan, which we, as I say, we've fed into a little bit more as well as part of the audit. It will take time to complete all of these, and obviously policies and things in particular do take time. They have to be drafted and then go through all the various channels. But I think, as I say, I think it's one that we would benefit from coming back to revisit perhaps, and it's something the committee might want to consider whether we want to include an audit next year, once we've given some space for these actions to be completed, and hopefully we'll be in a better position then to be able to report back.
Okay, so could you sort of make a note on your that actually that's something for us to consider and to check if how that is getting along?
On that note, actually, Chair, I will be starting to think about the audit plan for 22-23, believe it or not, in the next few months. So I will be bringing a paper to the committee to start that consultation process, perhaps in the next meeting. So do start your thinking caps on that.
The only one I'll do, one other thing I was just going to ask you about, obviously, work, this request, etc. Obviously, internal audit on the SIL and has done some extra consultancy on the Barley Thorpe development. Is that, in terms of this committee, obviously we have the internal audit plan, so it sits outside that. Are there a specific number of days allocated to those, or is it done on an ad hoc basis, and how does that bit work?
So that is commissioned on an ad hoc basis as required. So we would agree a number of days at the start, but that is resourced outside of your internal audit plan, so it doesn't impact on your internal audit delivery at all. It just provides the council with access to some independent senior officers who can do some of these more difficult reviews when you do need an independent person to feed into it. I think it's a useful resource for your as we definitely to tap into as needed, and of having access to that type of service.
It would be quite useful if just this committee just knew which ones were being done. I bet that's something that,
I'll have to speak to
not that we're reviewing the reports, but just to know what's actually being commissioned, because obviously there are areas of specific concern and risk to officers. I just ask that you could just feedback on that. Are there any other questions on the internal audit report?
Let me just add one point on that. I would agree. I think that seems reasonable in terms of some of the investigations. We do some investigations which are obviously of a fact-finding fraud nature, which may be in relation to staff conduct or those areas. Obviously, that wouldn't be appropriate for us to share.
No.
With the committee. So it probably be depending on the nature of the type of investigation. But yes, I'm happy to take that.
But at least to be notified of what you're doing, even if it's a headline, we're doing some, audit investigation, but we don't necessarily have to, because I think that would be just to keep this committee advised. Any other questions on Rachel's report? Thank you very much. We're noting the report, and then we've been asked to approve the amendment to the audit plan, and I think that there was something that was raised as concern from this committee, to reallocate 10 audit days, which originally were to assess compliance with the financial management code, to resource some initial work and consultancy review of recording and tracking of service requests. I'm happy to propose that. Is anyone in favour of the second? Thanks, Brown. And all those in favour, could you raise your hands? We're unanimous again. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you and your team for your efforts as well on this. Again, another challenging year. On to item 13 on the agenda, which is any other urgent business. I've not been notified of anything else. Tom, have you had anything else from this committee? No? So therefore, we can close the meeting at 19:56. Thank you, everybody. Safe drive home in this atrocious weather. And hopefully you've all got enough to fuel.